Hi, I'm Mandy Medley, and I'm one of the co-owners and workers at Pilsen Community Books, an independent bookstore and worker cooperative here in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. And I'm so excited to team up with our friends at Women and Children First to host Monica Trinidad, Nicole Marroquin, Damon Locks, and Josh MacPhee in celebration of this beautiful new edition of Celebrate People's History out this fall from Feminist Press. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event in my home office here in Pilsen, not at the bookstore, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Miami, and Peoria nations. I recognize and I'm grateful to the original caretakers of this land and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. And I invite you to learn more about the traditional stewards of the Pilsen and your own neighborhood at native-land.ca. And a few notes about this evening will go. First, I'll introduce our guests, and then they'll be in conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions at any time during the event, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll read them out at the appropriate time. And I also wanted to mention that if you purchase this beautiful book from either Pilsen Community Books or Women and Children First, you'll also receive a free poster, some of which you can see behind me here. They're really great. We have them in my home. I have them in the bookstore. They're just really beautiful. So thanks to Josh for sending them to us, and I'm so excited to share them with everyone here. I think it's fair to say that Women and Children First and Pilsen Community Books are the two politically engaged bookstores in Chicago, and we both have great year-round event programming. Women and Children First will be closed to the public starting on Saturday due to the situation in Chicago here. But they are also processing online orders and that can be shipped or picked up curbside every single day from 11 to 5. Their next virtual event is November 16th with author Paulo Ramos in honor of Finding Latinx. And Paulo will be joined in conversation by Cecile Richards. Pilsen Community Books will also be closed to the public starting on Monday, and we also take orders for delivery and curbside pickup 7 days a week on our website. Our next event is November 17th with Laura Paz and Maria Gamboa, two of the original badass Chicana organizers who are featured in the book Chicanas of 18th Street, and that's on Tuesday. Okay, I think I've talked enough, and now I'll introduce tonight's guest. Nicole Marroquin is a teacher, educator, and artist whose work exploring belonging and spatial justice includes research on student uprisings in Chicago public schools between 1967 and 1980, with the aim of recuperating histories of youth and women's leadership in the struggle for justice. She facilitates projects with young people that engage primary sources to problematize single-source narratives of history, and is faculty at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. In 2019, she started a social media project called Chicago Raza Research Consortium. Damon Locks is a Chicago-based visual artist, educator, and vocalist musician. He teaches art with Prisons and Neighborhood Arts Project at Stateville Correctional Center. He is a recipient of the Helen Coburn Meyer and Tim Meyer Achievement Award in the Arts, as well as 3 Arts awardee. He is a Soros Justice Media Fellow. Currently, he works in the MCA Space program, introducing civically engaged art to students at the high school Sarah E. Good STEM Academy. Damon leads the group Black Monument Ensemble and is a founding member of the group The Eternals and the Exploding Star Orchestra. Monica Trinidad is a queer Latinx artist and organizer in Chicago. Active in the movement for racial and gender justice, she is a co-founder of For the People Artists Collective, a radical squad of Black artists and artists of color in Chicago, and an emerging member of Just Seed's Artist Cooperative. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including NPR, Chicago Reader, Southside Weekly, Truth Out, and more, and has been shown at the Jane Addams Whole House Museum and the National Museum of Mexican Art. And last but not least, Josh MacPhee is a designer, artist, and archivist. He is founding member of the Just Seed's Artist Cooperative, the author of Celebrate People's History and an encyclopedia of political record labels, and co-editor of Signal, a journal of international political graphics and culture. He co-founded and helps run Interference Archive, a public collection of cultural materials produced by social movements. And with that, I am so excited to hand it over to Monica. Take it away.
Hey everybody. Thank you so much to Pilsen Community Books and Women and Children First for hosting and holding space for this conversation tonight. And thank you to those tuning in. Thank you to Damon, Josh, and Nicole for making time in your busy lives to be here with us tonight to talk about your critical artwork contributions for the new edition of the Celebrate People's History book and poster series published by Feminist Press. So my name is Monica Trinidad. I use she and her pronouns. And I'm so grateful to be here today in virtual community. There's a lot to grapple with right now in this super fast-paced and intensive political moment that we're finding ourselves in this year and this month and this day. I feel like we're sort of getting up every morning not really knowing what the world is going to look like or what the news will bring us when we wake up. And so in these hard moments, I think many of us turn to artists and musicians and creatives for a sense of hope and joy and guidance and reflection of the times that our communities have faced before as indicative to our resilience and our survival in the moment now. So I want to first reflect on two quotes from the authors of each forward. And for those that don't know, there's two editions, right? So the first edition was released in 2009, and the second edition just came out a few months ago, right? So there's been about a 10-year gap between these two editions. So Rebecca Solnit, who wrote the first forward, she talks about the impact of the street posters. And so Rebecca says, "The posters, they make the world a place that speaks to us as we travel through it, that tells us we are not alone, others have gone before, and hope remains ahead. If graffiti at its most basic is tagging, 'I exist, I am here,' a subversive statement for the young who are hardly allowed to exist, then the posters that Josh MacPhee has organized tag the city for Emma Goldman, for Grace and Jimmy Boggs, for the Zapatistas, the Oaxaca Commune, and the Highlander Folk School. They say, 'We existed, we exist, you are not alone. The past is alive and breathes life into possible futures.'" And then fast forward to 2020, and Charlene Carruthers, a brilliant Black organizer, writes that there are far too many gatekeepers in our schools, governments, media outlets, and even our homes who only open the doors for the stories they are comfortable telling. Art has this ability to shatter the barriers to knowledge created by the people who wield their power with repression and violence and misinformation. And so the images inside of the poster book weakens that stronghold that gatekeepers to history hold over our lives. And so I really love these quotes because it really speaks to the necessity of art, not only in moments of crises, but also as a tool to open up crucial space to expand our imaginations and to think beyond what is just right in front of us and what is offered to us. And because art and exhibitions and posters don't always have these like precise and measurable outcomes, you don't really see like a win through art or a victory through art in itself, but it's a tool to open up, you know, the space that we need. And it's important to make space to uplift art as both a reflection of and a spark of revolution, right? So it does both of those things. So Josh, I'm a huge fan of this poster series. It's always been a goal of mine to get a poster in this book because it's such a groundbreaking and historical necessity for all of us to have. So I want to pass it to you first to just tell us a little bit more about what prompted you to start this beautiful poster series in 2009.
Well, thanks, Monica. I mean, thanks to everyone. I'm so excited that there's a workaround bookshop in Chicago now. I'm so excited that Women and Children First is still kicking after all these years. I'm very excited to be here. And for those that don't know, this book and this larger project all started in Chicago in the late 1990s. I was living in a small apartment north in Ashland with a close friend of mine who had just become a Chicago public school teacher. And she was lamenting, her name is Liz Goss. She still works in education. She's still a genius. And she was just lamenting how there was nothing available for her to put up in her classroom that represented the interests and values of her students. And I had kind of come to Chicago recently. It was the largest city that I had ever lived in, and was amazed at how awash the public space was with messaging, but how all that messaging was unidirectional, top down, do this, do that, buy this, buy that. And so we sort of hit on this idea of trying to make a poster that celebrated Malcolm X's birthday. For her, it was something that she could put in her classroom and give to other teachers. For me, it was something that I wanted to put out on the street in hopes that it would be a little bit more generous than what was otherwise out there, and people could sort of take what they wanted from it and hopefully kind of see something of themselves in it. And that sort of launched this what's now 20 plus year, over 200 poster design projects. We also printed that first poster, and like, memory is a little hazy. I'm pretty sure it was in 1998 at a small print shop called C&D, which was a movement, had started as a movement-run print shop by people who were in the Sojourner Truth organization, which was a communist organization in the 1970s. It was nationwide, but had a big core in Chicago. And so from the beginning, part of the idea of this project is to like try to integrate all of these different aspects, to bring as many voices in as possible to be able to dictate and talk about and illustrate their own ideas about history and what is important in history, to have those posters printed in movement print shops in places where people control their own means of production, and then to get those posters out into as many places and avenues as possible, whether that's we pasted directly on the street, whether that's in a classroom, whether that's in a bookstore or someone's living room, that all of these are different venues that all can reach people in different ways. And so, it started in Chicago was very much a Chicago project in the beginning, and it's really exciting to have it sort of come home in a way tonight.
And did you have, when you started this poster project, did you have like guidelines, or what was sort of the criteria that you were envisioning for this poster series?
I mean, what has become the sort of set of very basic guidelines, all of the posters are 11 by 17. So like a tablet sheet of paper. They're all 2 colors, and they're all portrait size scale, like so long, tall, and they all somewhere say celebrate people's history. A lot of that was structural limits that we had. The largest sheet that they could print at C&D was 11 by 17 to full bleed. 2 colors was at the time so much cheaper than printing things full color. I also had been making posters for a number of years and was pretty profoundly influenced by posters from the global South, in particular posters from Cuba and other places in Latin America that were sort of known for sort of not necessarily perfect registration, off printing, sort of weird color combinations. And so part of it was trying to capture some of that aesthetic as well. And not to fake it, but to literally be using equipment that functioned the same way that the presses were functioning in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So those limits were set from the very beginning, and I've just kind of kept them. Actually, now I work with a worker-owned print shop now in Santa Cruz called Community Printers. That's been around for 20 plus years, and they've been pushing me to print these in full color because it's actually cheaper. Mm-hmm. And I've been kind of pushing it off because I love the fact that they're 2 spot colors, and that those colors have this sort of lush feel that you don't get when you use a full color process. But in the name of being able to print more posters, it may end up moving in that direction. We'll see. But so the limits were sort of structural rather than conceptual in a way.
Got it. Now, Damon, I want to pass it to you. You created a poster celebrating the Jamaican Maroons defeating the British from the mountains of Jamaica in the early 1700s. It's a beautiful poster and an incredible example of collective and organized resistance to colonialism. So can you share a little bit more with us on why you chose this particular historical moment to uplift for the poster series?
Yeah, but I do want to say that at the moment that Josh contacted me about doing this, it hit me in a moment where I had recently quit my 9-to-5 job, and I was looking at how to become an artist in the world and what I would do. And I think Celebrate People's History came at a moment where I really needed examples of how you could activate artwork and share knowledge with people. So it was a really great moment to really participate and acknowledge that kind of collective, push towards sharing. And there was a street art movement that was happening, but this was in a space that was street art, but also education. And it was definitely, there was such a community aspect about it that it really kind of excited me and helped. Like, I put that in a spot, of possibilities and places that I could operate as an artist. So previous to that, I had been doing a lot of design work, and I made music, and the politics was always a part of what I did. But in building myself as an artist, I put this in the category. I was like, this is something that I can do. This is how I can participate. And when asked, who could I celebrate in history, Queen Nanny was something that I had learned about as a young person when I started getting into reggae music and learning more about Jamaican culture. And the fact that she organized the Jamaican Maroons from the mountains to defeat the British armies, and reportedly magic was involved. I was just like, this is just too amazing to not mention, So it could be magic. It could be just military wisdom of guerrilla warfare style that people wanted to be like, how could they defeat it? It must be magic, or it could be magic. And I just think that the space in between, the conceptualizing of like, the first time I heard the story, I heard that the Maroons like stood next to trees and was like, we are trees, we're invisible, you can't see us. And then the British Army just marched up to them and they just, took them over. They overtook them. So those kind of stories were just kind of really imaginative to me, and were so, anti-colonial that I was like, let me spotlight that. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that magic and like what was the process like to try to translate that magic through a poster, like this flat 2D, it's something that's often, in my experience, hard to put a whole history right into this flat image. Like, what was that process like for you?
Well, it was hard to translate, but I enjoyed this idea that the military might of the British was overcome by probably a very physical, a physical presence where people used the resources that they had. So in the poster, I used my own hands. I took photos of my own hands and pressed down and included that in the piece in order to try to get that, like, just that physical down pressing. But there was balancing that graphic sensibility, trying to make something that was appealing, trying to make the shapes of the mountains work in with the design, and also have the kind of tactility of my own hands in the image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I really love the poster, so I hope everybody buys the book and checks out that poster. It's a really beautiful poster. Nicole, I wanna move to you and talk about the two posters in the book that you've included that uplift local student uprisings that took place in the Pilsen neighborhood in the 60s and 70s. So we're moving from the 1700s to the 1960s and 70s, I know. But these uprisings were at the Harrison High School in 1968 and then Froebel School uprising in 1973. And both of these uprisings were Black and brown students who were demanding more culturally relevant curriculum and were met with violence from the Chicago police. So can you tell us a little bit more about the significance of this history and then how this work informs our struggle for education justice in Chicago today?
Whew, good question. You know, I come at this from being a K through 12 teacher too, you know, and I spent a lot of years kind of getting a sense of the things that I wish that I had. And, you know, working these incredibly long days, coming home and parenting, you know, and then I reached for the pile of things that I needed and it wasn't there. And you do that enough time and you build a really long laundry list of things that you want. And also too, I'm kind of a natural middle school teacher. And so I'm always thinking, you know, how to talk to the young people about saying no, right? Because they like to, you know, make their own paths around that age. And so I was thinking about, like I've always had this in my mind. And then I was sitting around talking to some friends, some elder folks in the neighborhood. And one of them, I can't explain it. I don't know when it started. I had never met him before. He's sitting down with another friend of mine, and my other friend, Pete, couldn't get a word in edgewise because we were just like, oh my gosh. And then he starts telling me about this story where you can see this school and the helicopters were circling. It was like one of the first times people remember seeing the neighborhood on national news, right? In 1973. And these students had been gathering bricks on the roof of the school and boards and furniture for weeks, waiting for the standoff, right? And so while the helicopters were circling, the footage included a guy on the roof doing the power fist, and people were like, "Don't tell anyone his name." And I don't know why, so I wasn't sure why. But then apparently there was this, just the way he described it, it was like seared into my brain. I couldn't stop thinking about it. He said the profile of the school, which was, you know, a good 2 stories higher than anything else in the neighborhood, like it would have looked like almost a grain elevator. It was so big over here at 21st and Damon in Chicago, right? It used to be there. That the profile of the school during this event, there was furniture flying out of windows on every floor and smoke coming out of one window and a helicopter. The guy on the roof, I was like, ah, you know, and so I left. Okay, I was like over by like Loomis and 19th. And I was like power stepping all the way back to my apartment because I was like, I'm going to Google this so hard. I can't wait to get back. And I couldn't find anything. There was nothing there. You know, I looked and I was like, why aren't there, you know, what I really would have expected was to find at least some, you know, some blogs or something. You know, when that happens, you have to write the blog yourself. And so that's what happened. And I started looking, and of course, where did I find things? The first place I found stuff was on eBay, right? When they fired all the photographers from the newspapers, it dumped all of their stuff. And so there's like some mislabeled stuff. So you have to really be ready to dig and dig and dig. And those are people who like to do that stuff. I mean, this is your calling. And so, yeah, I found the pictures, and they were even more violent and intense and had more police than I had even been told, you know. And I thought, how come this isn't part of like the social justice and liberation histories, right? Like our public history, our shared knowledge of the struggle for justice in our schools, right? Because people talk about this, you know, we rally around our teachers. We have had a long road, right? And so, yeah, I couldn't figure out another way to do it. I would try to tell the story like I'm doing now, and it would get very, very long. And I was like, oh, I'm going to make posters. And then I made posters without words, and then I would still have to tell a story, and it's complicated. There's 2 schools. One was a 9th grade branch, and one was the high school. They're the same school. It doesn't make any sense. And so I figured, like, after probably about 3 years of making images, that I just had to put words on it. I felt like I had invented the wheel, you know. I was like, this is it. People understand it now. It's, yeah. It's a great formula.
Yes, totally. I have a question for you. I know a lot of your work is very physical and very print oriented. And a lot of artwork that has sort of emerged this year during the uprisings and the pandemic have kind of existed solely in this very digital format or like digital realm, right? So in terms of continuing in the tradition of like a physical preservation of our resistance stories, through traditional methods of printing, what is your sort of take on this emphasis and this usage of digital art in our movements, as opposed to strictly sticking in that physical print world, if that makes sense?
Let me think.
And anyone free to jump in too. Yeah.
I was gonna say I'm still a big fan of, handmade everything. I mean, if I could, I reluctantly started printing again. I was like drawing every single individual thing and like, had to snap out of it when I really wanted to get the word out. And I don't know. I can see the benefit of all of it. I've got a lot of hope for what we can do with the digital right now. Here we are stuck in our houses, but I've been having some pretty exciting experiences with 3D, right? Some augmented reality and some layered space things with some experiments that I'm working on. I think the idea originally was there was a proposal I wrote to bring to life some of these things that had happened, right? The school uprisings, events at Froebel, right? And then the things that happened in the Harrison High School lunchroom from that poster, right? That actual photo, and building 3D wireframes and then putting it back into place. And then the youth in the schools could then, check it out and walk around it and actually, hopefully, ideally hear some of the young organizers actually from their perspective and hear their voices talking about what actually happened those days, right? To actually bring the young people who go to school in these places or walk past these places, like into a relationship with the people that fought for them to actually have, access to education in the language that they speak at home, right? To understand too that, like they're actually living the legacy in a lot of ways, like students at Benito Juarez definitely are. And students at Portugali and Salcedo, which is the former Harrison building, like they're definitely, living the legacy of the struggle, right? There was an 80% dropout rate among Mexicans, right, at the time, like that, people were pissed and they fought, like, we should all know about this, right? And I'm not 100% guaranteed that we're not going to have to do it again. So, it's good I think it makes people feel more confident when they understand that these fights have happened, and it's happened here, and it just, I don't know, a young person said to me, like, oh, now I'm thinking about some of these older folks in the neighborhood, like a little differently. So I ask them, maybe they know something, about this. Yeah, I got hopes for all of it.
Yeah. Josh and or Damon, speaking to the digital realm piece, I have a question around, there's been sort of this upsurge in artists moving from commercial-based art to social justice and movement art, right? We saw at the height of the uprisings, like everybody was posting online, new, Black Lives Matter artwork and like defund the police artwork, and there's this beautiful, upsurge in this art, and we need it. But what would be your advice to these artists as folks with a lot of experience in collaborating with organizations or creating artwork, on behalf of movements in Chicago?
I'll jump in, but it's there are always moments, and we're definitely in a moment now, and I always feel like moments are very important and very galvanizing. But I feel like the sustained work to keep keep voices being heard, keep representing when the moment dies down and it's not as exciting, to keep doing the work.
Yep.
So this isn't new. It takes new shapes, it takes new faces, but the work continues. And so that's what I say.
Mm-hmm.
I would add that I think we live in a society that really encourages artists to think of themselves as individuals, and the digital realm exacerbates that, in which you want your image to get as many likes as possible, and I think that even when you're doing that in the service of trying to raise money for a social justice cause, etc., I think it's important to keep in mind that there is, at least in my mind, there's a difference between making art about politics and making culture that is part of politics.
Mm-hmm.
These are blurry distinctions. There's no hard lines here, but I think it's important, like you said earlier, Monica, to sort of acknowledge that art very rarely does much by itself. And so if you're truly interested in transforming the world that we live in, then you need to work with people that are organizing to do that. And art is one tactic in a set of strategies to reach larger goals. And if you're just sort of spitballing your artwork into the internet void, that's cool and it could inspire people. And there's all kinds of things that may or may not happen from that. And that's not a bad thing. But if you're truly interested in social transformation, then you should probably try to link your horse to people that know what the hell they're doing. And there's a lot of people that have spent a lot of their lives learning how to mobilize and learning how to actually figure out the levers of power and to transform and change things. And our art can only be more powerful and more of the politics we believe in rather than just about it when we work with those people and when we're in dialogue with them. I'm not saying that as artists we should just take direction from someone who says draw this or draw that. We need to throw our ideas in the ring as much as theirs, but it's a conversation, and it's a conversation in which maybe you do end up making things that you wouldn't have made if you weren't embedded in an organization that has a larger strategy. And that's what I would tell people, that if you're truly interested in your art affecting social change, then work with people who are organizing to do that.
Mm-hmm. That is super solid advice. And I always like to reference the I hope I don't butcher this, How to Reimagine the World. It's a document created by Culture Strike, which is now the Center for Cultural Power, and Micah Bazant and Fabiana Rodriguez, and they wrote these collaborative principles for artists and organizations, right? Because Josh, like you said, it's all about the conversation, right? The process of how you're making the art is just as important, if not more important, than the art product itself, right? And so, yeah, I really love the advice that both you and Damon offered. Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I was just having really romantic feelings about seeing the Union bug on the bottom of that poster of mine.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Well, yeah. The poster that I created that's in this new edition, it highlights the fight for reparations for survivors of Chicago police torture under former police commander John Burge in the 1970s through 1991. And this history is at this intersection where in 2013 is when the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials introduced a reparations ordinance in City Hall demanding reparations for torture survivors and their families. And it passed in 2015 in City Council with this massive reparations package that included a formal apology from the city, financial compensation, curriculum that's being taught in public schools, free college tuition for survivors and their family members, right? So, thinking about the generational impact that police torture has on people. and then a community counseling center that exists now, and it's fully functional on the south side. However, the last item, which is the public memorial, which has been designed by Patricia Nguyen, who is an incredible artist in Chicago and founder of Access Lab. That memorial is the only piece of the legislation that the city of Chicago has not yet enacted, and they're, Lori is claiming no funds, and so it's the one piece of legislation that's being snubbed, and to me it's potentially the most visually and emotionally impactful piece for all of the residents of Chicago to see this public memorial go up, acknowledging the harm that has been done to Black men and women in Chicago by the Chicago Police Department. So that would be a truly bold and transformative act. And so like the dragging out of it sort of speaks to the power of art and storytelling to truly changing the conditions of our everyday lives. So I just wanted to name that about the poster, and to name that that the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials is still fighting to get this memorial up and to get the funds through city council. So just want that on folks' radar. I'm sure that there's ways to support. I know there's a petition that's going around. But yeah, I just wanted to name that. I think before we move to the Q&A portion, I just wanted to see if Damon, Josh, or Nicole, if you had anything else you wanted to add about the book series.
Well, I'm really thankful for it, not only as to be able to participate, but as a person that spends a lot of time in schools, it's really become a really wonderful resource. So I'm very appreciative of it, and I hope to continue to engage in the future and make more work in collaboration with Just Seeds and the Celebrate People's History, because it's really done really wonderful things, and it's helped me communicate ideas to young people. And it's just been it's a great book, so everyone go get it.
Yeah, as far as it being a teaching tool, also, I brought two different classes to the show that was at Co-Prosperity Sphere. Was that last year? I don't even know what is going on with the calendar, but seeing them all together, like that wall of posters, like the conversation I was able to have about text and about the balance and the color combos and the different kind of mark making and compositions, like which ones feature the figure. And I mean, like the conversation, it was really kind of like a art teacher's dream to be able to talk about it that way and to have them all in one place. And since then, I'm like sort of aspiring to get my own like solid wall of of them together, because of the way it actually opens up space to have conversations about, like, really practical elements of designing your own posters. And so I think this will be my third semester actually teaching through the collection, and that's been real important. I mean, because then you get all these other bonuses, right? People are learning all these things about people that they hadn't known about previously, but also like just the way that a bunch of these different artists are approaching this. I mean, there can be like the same artist with two really different approaches. So I mean, it's just a really it's been a real big gift to art teachers too, appreciating it.
Thank you. I mean, connected to that, I think that something that wasn't necessarily part of the original conception, but very quickly kind of got built into the project, was the idea that this could be as democratic as possible. And so one of the things that's been really great about art teachers picking up on the series and using it is that all of these young students make posters, and then the teachers send them to me. And so at this point, a half dozen of the posters in the book were made by 19-year-olds. That was their first piece of like mass-produced art. And it's really sort of wonderful and fulfilling to be at a wall of them and to see people sort of looking at two posters next to each other. And one was made by like someone who has a very successful gallery career, and one was made by a 19-year-old, and it's literally the only piece of work they've made that's ever left kind of their own personal sphere, and people gravitate to the 19-year-olds. They're like, because of they all take on that same size and scale and scope. It sort of flattens. It doesn't flatten the content, but because the content still is always sort of like rubbing up against and vibrating, because posters disagree with each other and there's sort of a cacophony, but it sort of equalizes the value. And so, I mean, to that end, the series is always open. So anyone who's out there listening or watching this, whether you are a late career artist or whether you've never made a piece of work that's left your notebook, get in touch, because there's always room for more posters.
I have a question, if it's okay if I can hop in. Speaking as a member of a worker cooperative, I'd love to hear more about Monica, both the For the People Arts Collective and Josh, Just Seeds, and how those artist collectives work, the history behind them, and the vision of what you think that the role they have to play in movements in the future.
Josh, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, Just Seed started in a Logan Square bedroom. I had been making stuff for movements like housing organizations and criminal justice groups, posters and T-shirts and things. They had very little budget, and they would pay me in the stuff that I was making. And so I would have a box of T-shirts and a stack of posters. And I had friends that were authors, and they had a way to get their work out in the world. And I had friends that were musicians, and they had distribution channels. But there was no existent way for this kind of politicized applied art to sort of get out of my bedroom, so to speak. And so I had worked at Kinko's in the overnight shift, like many sort of young do-it-yourselfers did in the 80s and 90s. And so I made a flyer that had pictures of all the stuff that I had made, and I stuck it in an envelope and sent it to everyone I knew and said, does anyone want to buy this crap? And, it started out with like one order a month, and then it was one order a week. And then pretty soon, people who were doing things similar to me were contacting me and saying, hey, can you sell my stuff too? And then within a couple years, it had gotten to the point where it no longer fit, not only in my bedroom, but in the entire apartment. And there needed to be a way to sort of deal with this. And it wasn't that I had any idea what I was doing. I was just the only one stupid enough to try something. And so that brought people sort of out of the woodwork. And then in 2006, we decided that it didn't make sense for me to be sort of managing this. Why don't we do it as a cooperative? Why don't we sort of collectivize? And so that's what happened with 16 artists originally. And now there's 41 of us, and hopefully more in the future, in Mexico, the US, and Canada. And I guess one of the things that I had always hoped, because I knew that, it's amazing. I didn't go to art school, which is maybe part of the reason why I was able to do this. Because I think that from speaking a lot in art schools and now doing a little teaching in art school, it's shocking to me how art school still centers around the major point of distribution for artists' work is a gallery system, which for 200 years has failed 99% of the people that have tried to use it. It has never been successful for anyone other than people making money. So like the lack of experimentation with other ways is sort of shocking. And since there was actually a lot of experimentation in the 30s and 40s and 50s that got kind of erased and buried. And then in the 60s and 70s that got erased and buried. And, there's a world of unburying all of that. But for me, I had no access to any of that. And so I always knew, like, well, whatever Just Eats becomes, it's never going to be able to work for the number of people that need a system that's different than the gallery system. So I'd always sort of hoped that there would be other experiments. And so part of what was really exciting a number of years ago to go and visit Chicago and find out that there was this thing called For the People, that was a group of artists that were experimenting with another kind of like collective cooperative form as a way to try to exist as artists in the world and to sort of transform the world in the ways they felt was needed. And so to me, that is as much or more a sort of victory for the model than the actual sort of like, no matter how much work we sell or whatever. Part of it is about spreading the idea of sort of decentralizing how art exists in the world.
Yeah, and for the People Arts Collective, yeah, it was absolutely an inspiration, or we took inspiration from, you know, Just Seeds and from Culture Strike and from Agit Arte that's in Puerto Rico, and so many other artist collectives that existed in Chicago too, like oh man, I'm blanking on some of the names right now, but there were some like Pilsen based, like Mujeres Mutantes. Yeah. So anyway, so there was a lot of Chicago Act Collective. So there's all these like little, you know, collectives popping up all over the place. And something for me and a lot of my co-organizers in particular in Chicago, we were sort of lacking the community of artists who were already deeply in community with folks on the ground, right? Leading efforts and campaigns for Black Lives Matter in like 2015. And so a lot of us got together who were artists who didn't really bring our art into these organizing spaces, you know, frankly, like not deeming them, you know, important enough to bring into that space. And then vice versa, some of us were also organizers that just didn't see the value of our art in those spaces. So like we just wanted to bring everyone together, and we started with creating radical coloring books as a method of telling the stories of struggle and resistance in Chicago. You know, there's I think she's listening right now, but Sarah G, who is we refer to her as the people's camera because she's so amazing. She documents so much of our struggle in Chicago, and you know, and was part of For the People when we started. And so we all sort of came together with the Chicago Child Care Collective and created this radical coloring book called Color Me Rising. And it documented almost like a activism yearbook, where it was like all of the campaigns that happened in 2015 in a way that was accessible to many audiences, including young people, right? And that's why we worked with the Chicago Child Care Collective to have that language and that ability to translate these really difficult stories about police violence and about Ayotzinapa and about all of these different issues happening in our communities. And then we also did a lot of art, you know, we just started doing art support, banner making and poster making for the campaigns that we were part of, especially the Buy Anita campaign to get State's Attorney Anita Alvarez out of office, all the way up to the No Cop Academy campaign, which we're still fighting that Cop Academy because Lori Lightfoot still wants to build it. And so what we've sort of, you know, evolved into now is sort of just almost like a support network for people, for each other, for artists who are still, you know, either having, I mean, I didn't go to art school either. And so I'm a gender and women's studies major, and I have a communications day job, right, to pay the bills. And so I think it's important for us to be in community with other artists to stay creative together and to stay in conversation together about the importance of movement art, right? And so this year we were going to try to open up a space in Chicago, but then once the pandemic hit, we saw a need for a lot of artists struggling that had lost commissions, that had lost their own service jobs, that had lost just a lot of income. And so we actually then turn those funds those grant funds that we had, we turned those funds into relief funds and micro grants, and we ended up so far giving out over 20,000 to over 80 different artists in Chicago, and we're about to hand out another additional amount of money for another round. So it's really just became this collective of artists and organizers who recognize how integral art and organizing are to each other.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. We have a question or two from the chat if y'all are game. The first one is, how do we make ourselves responsible to archive and continue sharing these stories and histories as artists, educators, and activists? And what does it look like to be responsible for and to these histories?
I feel like that's like a Nicole question.
To say, I think this is a Monica question. I mean, that poster of yours, I just want to get back to that. I just thought it was, I'm a big fan of the way that you got those names of the people in there and that performance with the march, with the banners. I'm a big fan of that poster. Didn't want to let that slip by. Yeah, I'm not sure about responsibility to the history. I mean, on one hand, I hemmed and hawed for a long time before I got around to actually like making things about this. Like, I complained about other people not doing it for a fair amount of time. And then I was like, oh, I can do it. You know, I don't know why it took so long. Yeah, I blame art school. I was like, I am a ceramic sculptor. I don't know what it was, really. I don't know what it was. But now, sort of like my secondary not getting to it was telling people I was going to do it. And a really, really smart organizer, a brilliant person in general, Miriam Kaba, said, Nicole, you don't have to make 100, just make one. And I was like, and that's how I made the first one anyway. And so I guess just doing it and sharing the information and not sort of piling it up in a place where it can't be seen. I guess I'm a little bit nervous sometimes when some of these materials, like the primary sources, come to me when somebody's like, here's this, because I don't have like an open library. I get real nervous. I want to get it out to people where they can look at it, right? Because I'm not here to make sense or process it for people. I'm not here to digest the food and spit it into the baby's mouth. Like, I really just want to make sure that it's out there. So one thing I like to do is to Xerox things a lot and actually give it out to young people in schools. But that's just one of the things. The poster is another thing, but making sure we don't sit on it and just wait. I think it's really crucial. Waiting for the right time is like, I don't know what that means. I don't know if I answered that question.
Great. There's one more question in the chat, and then I think we're almost reaching the end of our time. But before we go, I would like to, after this question, if you guys want to shout out what you're organizing around, what you're working on, what campaigns we should be paying attention to, I want to make sure we get to that before we end. But here's one more question from the chat. What are some ways that you all see archiving happening, and what forms are they taking, and how can we build from that and other potential forms? I would argue that this book is a form of archiving as well, but maybe there are other forms that have emerged since March, since June.
I think that the world of archiving has been parts of it at least have been rapidly democratizing in the last decade. And it's been really amazing to see. When we founded Interference Archive here in Brooklyn in 2011, we were really felt like we were sort of out on a limb. Our goal was to make the material created by social movements accessible to both the people that had been part of those movements, but anyone that would want to be part of movements that would learn from those things moving forward. That the the material itself was just stuff until people actually took the ideas out of it and redeployed them into the world, and that archives were too obsessed with stuff and not concerned enough with sort of giving people access to what was relevant about the stuff. And I think that's really starting to change. A decade ago, it was extreme, like archive culture was very closed, and it's really has to at least pretend to be looking like it's open these days. How that plays out, we'll see. Large institutions have amazing ways of enclosing things and appearing as if they're being very open, but ultimately shutting people down. But as was mentioned before, I think that the key to a successful archive when it comes to movements and social transformation is to break down as many gatekeepers as possible. If a 15-year-old can't walk into your archive and find something that's interesting to them and take it back out in the world, then you're not doing your job.
Anything else to add to that? Anyone?
I wanted to also mention, I don't know, it was a long time ago, Damon, but I remember that it was at Northwestern, I think, that there was histories that you're weaving into this sound piece. You got up and I thought you were going to do a lecture, and then you made the art. It was the thing itself as opposed to talking about the thing. Yeah. And it I just melted my brain. But the way that you wove all these pieces together and we're still telling these stories about history, I mean, I think that one of the solutions too is not staying fixed in any forms, right? Like we have to just let the forms be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think I'm the kind of artist that's very bad at archiving my own stuff, My partner always is giving me grief about archiving, but I do collect things. I'm a record collector, book collector, sound collector, and one of the ways that I connect to the archive is by pushing the archive forward. So through sound, I try to get those voices and get the ideas to keep going, create spaces and create sounds and beds to keep the ideas moving forward. So that comes in the form of often sound work where you can hear the voices of people talking, and they're not all the famous voices. So I think that's my own kind of form of working with the archive, but hopefully keeping the archive a living archive, so people are still actively connecting to it.
Yeah, I am also really not the greatest at archiving my work, and my partner also tells me to save my artwork and don't toss those what do you call it, like the sketches in the garbage, right? Keep those sketches.
Process work.
But I mean, what I'm thinking about in terms of archiving is that I didn't mention this in the bio, but I'm also, I have a podcast with my friend and co-organizer, Paige May from Asada's Daughters, and our podcast is called The Lit Review. And we like to joke that it's like Spark Notes for the movement, but it's basically us talking to organizers about a book that has influenced their political analysis or their theories of change. And so, we're in season 3 now, but it's really cool because typically in the first 10, 15 minutes of the episodes, we talk about current events and current campaigns going on and current, chaotic election stuff happening. So we're just talking about those current events. And so in a way, when we go back to we're going to go listen to that episode about Bill Ayer's book, Man the Impossible, we get to hear in the beginning, at that time was the first train takeover for No Cop Academy when young people took over the CTA and and started, chanting and passing out information on this No Cop Academy campaign. And then Chance the Rapper saw that on Twitter and then retweeted it, and then the campaign blew up, And so it's like, but that moment, that really beautiful moment, is archived now in this book podcast, right? So that was, that's the only good thing that's the only thing I'm good at archiving.
I'm such a fan of that podcast too. I love it so much.
Oh, thank you.
Before we end tonight, would anyone like to tell us a little bit about campaigns we're working on, things we should be paying attention to, new projects? Would love to hear.
Well, I've been trying to no commissions till 2021 has been my motto since like October. It's been great for creating boundaries. But I would say for folks, especially in Chicago, to keep an eye on a couple of campaigns going on. There's a Defund CPD campaign that's been going on, that's being led by folks of the Black Abolitionist Network. I believe they just finished their last training of the season, but there's still ways to plug into the campaign if you just follow the Instagram Defund CPD. And then there's also another campaign to keep an eye on, is the Treatment Not Trauma campaign that Rosanna, who is an alderman in City Council, is working with Brighton Park Neighborhood Council to create an alternative to calling 911. It's like a different number for cases of mental health crises, where a police officer would not come. It would be a licensed professional who can deal with mental health crises. And Lori Lightfoot is trying to counter that by doing this co-responder model, and it's really messy. And so I would just urge folks to check out the Treatment Not Trauma campaign that is being led by young folks and Rosanna in City Council.
A project that I've been working on, or a part of, is through Prison and Neighborhood Arts Education Project, PNAP. We are doing a project called the 51st Free State that is multi-limbed, where we're developing work inside to produce work outside that will be a collection of ideas around anthems and tools for liberation, movement, writing, making sound for anthems, and making movement that goes with those sounds, and making backdrops and having dancers respond to the pieces. And of course, it's an ever-shifting project now because of the COVID restrictions. We're constantly forming something new out of it. But that's something to keep an eye out, because the work that's been being developed so far is really exciting and super interesting to me. And shout out to Sarah Ross and Aaron Hughes and Martine Whitehead, who are coordinators with me for this project.
Amazing people.
What a team. Oh, you said new projects, and my mind went blank, so I'm going to pass on that.
I'll just say, here in New York, I have spent a good part of my energy the last 4 years working on the campaign to close Rikers Island jail complex, and that work is ever ongoing. There's a mayoral election next year. Even though the city council is committed to closing it, you just never know. So we're building new organizing strategy. Through that work, I've built a long-term relationship with the Cattell Center for Equity, Health, and Justice, which is a community-based organizing and legislative campaign organization that does work in both New York and Connecticut. And so we're going to keep pushing to close Rikers. It's right now at actually quite the lowest capacity it's been at in decades and decades. But it always needs to go further until it's gone. And then also we're about to launch a huge campaign in Connecticut to decarcerate the state and ideally close multiple prisons. So that's going to launch relatively quickly and hopefully move fast. And I'm excited because I think I'm going to get to do some bus advertisements and like some big stuff for that. So I think that we're in a sort of topsy-turvy and difficult time, but we're also in a moment in which ideas that when I was when I was younger, I felt like holding an abolitionist kind of position was just so far in the margin, and they're moving quite rapidly towards the center. And so I think our work is to just keep pushing that and to take advantage of opportunities to continually claim the center with those politics.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Monica, Nicole, Damon, and Josh, for joining us here tonight. I want to mention that you can buy this beautiful book at Pilsen Community Books or Women and Children First. Pilsen Community Books also carries some things from Just Seeds, and we also carry things from a Revolutionary Lemonade Stand, Stefania Weiner. She has a poster in the book as well. Support these artists, buy the book, and yeah, get out there in the world. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.